Well, good morning and welcome to our Zoom with the Fort Langley National Historic Site. This is our last one for the month of June and for this school year. And we are in for a treat because Ammon is in one of the buildings at the fort. So, Ammon, you can take it away.
Excellent. Good morning. So again, welcome to Fort Langley. My name's Ammon, rhymes with salmon. And we are inside the Cooperage. It's where you get the saying to coop things up. So if you were a cooper, you made things called casks. And a cask is anything like this. But depending on their size, they have different names. This one I'm holding, we would probably call something like a firkin. Firkin. If we get a bit bigger, we call them barrels. Bigger than that, we call them things like hogshead or puncheons, and even a butt, where you actually get the saying a butt load. But here in Fort Langley, you needed a cooperage because our biggest money maker was this salmon and other food. This isn't a real one. This is a real rubber salmon, so thankfully it doesn't smell that bad. But we would have to put all this food in barrels so we could ship it to different places. And the main reason you want to make barrels and casks that are round is so you can roll them. They're easier to move. And like I've said in previous weeks, if you lived in Fort Langley, there really wasn't a school, so kids had to work. And one of the main jobs for kids, rolling barrels. A 5-year-old kid in Fort Langley should be able to move a 200-pound barrel of salted pickled salmon. It's a lot easier to have that in a barrel than a box. But what I want to show you inside the cooperage are some of the strange tools they would be using. Because if you wanted to be a cooper in Fort Langley, you had to train as an apprentice, like a student, for 8 years. Here's the interesting thing. If this was the 1800s and you wanted to be a doctor, it only took 3 or 4 years. It took twice as long to become a cooper. And a cooper was a very well-known and praised profession. People respected coopers a lot. Because we have to remember, there weren't refrigerators back then. You want to keep your food for a long time, you could dry it, you could smoke it, or you put it in a barrel and pack it with a lot of salt. But what I really want to show are some of the old tools. This is my favorite tool in all of Fort Langley. It's called a sun plane. This isn't the actual one that they used in the fort, but this was given to us by another cooperage that actually used to operate in downtown Vancouver. It was called Sweeney's Cooperage, and they closed in 1986. But they had this in their family for over 100 years. And what this does is 2 different jobs. First job it does, use this barrel as an example. Once you have the barrel made, you put this part of the sun plane right on top of the barrel, and you run it all the way around. And as it does that, it cuts the same height for all these wooden planks called staves, so your barrel is smooth on the top. And then you turn it around. And on this side, they have a little sharp bit here. It's called the crows. I'm going to come up closer to you and show it. So this sharp bit right here. It's almost like a V shape to it. And it actually digs out the wood on the inside of your barrel. And as you do that, it carves out a little groove for the lid of your barrel to fit into when you close the barrel up. Now, if you wanted to start being an apprentice in this cooperage, you would probably start at the age of 12. By the time you're 20, you should have the skills of a cooper. But your first job at the age of 12 would be using the sun plane. This would be for the older apprentices. Your job would be using this. It's called the froe. It's a real sharp blade. And you don't swing it like an axe. You actually rest this right on top of the stump. of wood, and you get a big mallet, something almost like this, and you hammer it into the wood, and you break off pieces, planks of wood that we turn into staves. So each wooden piece that makes a barrel, called the stave. Most of the wood we used in Fort Langley, we got from a place called Stave Lake. And the lake got its name because all the white pine trees that were growing there, they were cut down and brought to Fort Langley to make staves for our barrels. So you would start around 5:30 in the morning. And in here, you would have about 8 people working in the cooperage for 12 hours. 12 hours with 8 people working. How many barrels do you think could be made by the end of the day? Just hold up with your fingers. How many do you think? If you think lots, go like this, maybe 100. Surprisingly, only 10 barrels would be made in Fort Langley. 8 people working, 12 hours a day. But the most surprising thing I found was here, they use no glue. It's all perfect design. These are like jigsaw puzzles when they're all perfectly put together. And the hardest part of it all was a tool called the Jointer plane. And that's this tool over here. Doesn't seem like much. It only looks like a table right now. So I'm going to clear it off and I'm going to show you what it looks like. This sun plane is like a woodworking plane. Move this out. And instead of running this plane on the wood, if you look really close, there's a very sharp blade right there. This is the sharpest blade in all of Fort Langley. Everyone that has done demonstrations here in the cooperage has cut their fingers here at least once. You have to be very careful with this, because when we use this, we actually have it upside down and it's placed in the table. And we run the stave along the plane. You might hear the sound. Listen for it. And if you heard that, what's happening is it's shaving off little curls of wood. And it's making the sides what we call beveled edges. And every stave actually looks kind of like a diamond. It's wide in the middle and it's tapered. It has an angle on each side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And all of them, you're trying to get to be exactly the same for all the staves that make the barrel. But there's no stencil. There's no ruler. This is all done by eye. That's why it would take about 8 years of training. And then you bring all the pieces together. You kind of put them together like a jigsaw puzzle. And you have it assembled on a hoop like this. Now this hoop, how do we get it on? This is called the Jointer, the windlass. And the windlass is like a lasso. So here's the handle here, has all the rope to it. And then the big handles, kind of like a ship's wheel, and we turn them. And as we turn them, it tightens up the staves. And as I do this, you'll hear the wood bending. It actually makes a sound. If I keep doing it too tight, all the wood could explode. So we have to be careful. But a lot of different steps used to make these barrels. Simply so we could put food in it and send it to faraway places. Food like potatoes, salmon, and cranberries. Any questions about this building?
So boys and girls, if you have a question, you can put up your hand or type your question in the comments. I see Weston or Harrison, do you have a question? Who is it, Weston? What's your question, bud?
How does salmon turn into food?
How does salmon turn into food? Excellent question. Well, we wouldn't put this whole fish inside. You'd have to cut it into fillets. So you cut out all the parts you're not going to eat, and you're just going to take out the two steak-like pieces. And once that was cut up, kids would run with the filleted pieces that their moms cut, and then they would bring it to the cooperage where the dads would pack it with salt. So you go fillet, salt, fillet, salt. Every barrel would have 90 fillets of salmon packed with salt and then topped off with a brine, like salty water. So we're pickling the fish. Who wants to eat pickled fish? I don't see many hands. The Hudson's Bay Company said this pickled fish could last 2 years in a barrel. Now, whether you want to eat it at that point, that's up to you. But of most of the places in the world where we sold our salmon, we sold our salmon to Hawaii. Hawaiians wanted our fish more than anyone else. And the main reason they wanted the salmon, it looked cool. It was the first red meat Hawaiians ever saw. So just because of the color of the salmon, Hawaiians paid more money for it than anyone else. And that's why we had to salt it. Because if we prepared our salmon the way the First Nations here would, smoking the salmon would change the color. Another way to preserve the salmon was called wind drying. And wind drying looks like this. It'd be hanging up in the canyon, and then you'd have little cuts into it so the oil could drip out, and it would bake in the sun, but that changes the color. So that wasn't really that popular. So that's why they wanted it salted, and that's why we would pickle the salmon and send it to Hawaii. Good question. Any other questions?
Awesome. So there's a question in the comments from Taya and Kaya. They want to know, how old is the National Historic Site?
The National Historic Site, well, one building, the storehouse, became a National Historic Site as of 1923. So in 3 years from now, the storehouse as a historic site will be 100 years old as a historic site. But the site itself, the way the park is today, became a National Historic Site in 1958. But the actual storehouse, it became a historic site in 1923, but it was built in 1840, making it one of, well, the oldest non-native building in BC.
And that was the building that you took us through last week on our Zoom meeting together. And
Exactly.
I actually have put that up on our Facebook page, but also I got our YouTube channel loaded up with videos this weekend. So you can check out the tour of the storehouse.
Yeah, because next month, that storehouse turns 180 years old. It's 27 years older than Canada.
That's pretty old. Lacey, do you have a question, kiddo? What's your question?
So, would your last name be Cooper if you were a Cooper?
Yeah, if your last name is Cooper, that means your ancestors used to make casks. They would make barrels. Just like if your last name was Smith, that means your ancestors used to work with metal.
Smith. And also, if you decided that you wanted to be something else, but your family was Coopers, would your last name change, or would you still be a Cooper?
Ooh, that's a good question. You might keep your last name. Nowadays, most people would keep their last name. Back then, most of the people that took up trades that didn't come from families probably didn't have last names either. So they took on their trade as their last name, and that's how Cooper and Smith became last names for people. So if you were working in Fort Langley and you were from the outside, some of the Hawaiian men only came here with one name. They didn't have last names. So then they took on last names of their trades. So did some of the native men from the East that came to work here as well. But if your last name is anything, it probably means the trade your ancestors did.
All right, so does anyone else have any questions either about the cooperage or about the fort in general or about anything to do with really anything? Let's just quiz Ammon and see what we get. The fish in the barrels, you say would last about 2 years. Was that?
That's what the company would say, 2 years, yeah.
How long would other food last in barrels? Was there other food that got packaged in barrels, or?
Potatoes would be packed in barrels and shipped away, but you have to use them pretty, well, they wouldn't last that long because they would begin to sprout after a while. The shortest lifespan was cranberries. Once you harvested them, cranberries back then would only last about 3 weeks. But cranberries, people paid a lot of money for around 1850, 1851 because cranberries have a lot of vitamin C, and they were used to cure a disease called scurvy. And there were a lot of men in California during the California gold rush that had scurvy. They needed our cranberries so desperately, they called the cranberries red gold. So we had to pack them quickly and ship them down. But cranberries, once they're harvested, are only expected to last about 3 weeks before they start going really too bitter to eat and start mushing up. So we would only store it in water to keep the berries separate so they wouldn't mush into a jam in the barrels. But it would take about 2 weeks to get the barrel from here to San Francisco, where the gold miners were. So that meant they only had about 7 days to buy it and eat it before it went bad.
Interesting. So it was very different back then getting food than now. But it's neat to see the different technologies and how they made it work.
Exactly. It's not like how we can go to the stores today where you can probably get things like, watermelon or pineapples all year round. But back then you could get some of these foods seasonally, but the salmon, the way we packed it, you would always have available all year round if you needed it, albeit that it would be pickled.
Right. So does anyone else have a question for Ammon before we sign off? Lacey, Declan, anything else to ask today? So we have learned so much over the last couple of months from you, Ammon, and I've really enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to chatting with you more, and we'll let everyone know what the plan is moving forward. But this is going to be our last one here on Zoom for the summer because I think all you guys should be outside and enjoying being outside instead of sitting at your computers. So we'll talk some more about what that looks like, and I'll send a message to everyone and let everyone know what it looks like.
Absolutely.
So Taya and Kaya want to know, what is the wooden tool behind you?
Which one? This thing right here? That looks like a star pattern?
Is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we call a matrix. And a matrix would be what we would use to shape our hoops, because originally all our hoops were made out of wood. Metal was very expensive. It would come from England. So you see these wooden hoops up there, up on the wall? Those are the hoops we would use to put the barrels together, but you can't just bend them up and make sure they stay a perfect circle pattern. We have to put pegs in the matrix and then wrap the vine of the tree around it and let it dry in a circle shape. And once it's dry, we can pop it off and put it on the wall. And then when we're making barrels, we can take those hoops that are already made off the wall and put them on the barrels. Here's some that are drying right now. If you see these ones here. And these hoops were just as strong as the metal ones. And the only problem was the way we have to stack the barrels on the ship. I don't know if you can see, away in the corner is where we stack the barrels. They're all on their sides. And if the barrel is on the ship and the ship is rocking in the ocean, the friction would make the wooden hoops break. So then we had to start using metal hoops as well to make sure that the entire barrel doesn't break open. But still use wood wherever possible.
That was an excellent observation, Taya and Kaya, and super interesting. how those were formed. So that was a great question. Thank you. So Ammon, I just want to thank you for joining us again today and for the time that you've given us over the past couple months to teach us about some of the history at the fort.
Not a problem. It's always fun to share it on Wednesday mornings with you guys.
Yes, well, we'll chat some more, you and I, about what we can do moving forward in the future. And boys and girls, I hope you have an excellent summer. Don't forget to come back and join us tomorrow for the programs that we have. So thank you very much, Ammon.